So today I'm going to talk about case law and legislation for bilingual education. The first thing I want to talk about is Farrington v. Takushig. This was a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1927. It established states' authority to decide what language was used for instruction in public schools. The court protected the right of parents to organize after-school heritage language classes. Um, this case, it kind of hurt and helped bilingual education. Um, it hurt because it did establish the state authority to decide what language was used, so it kind of allowed the states to push that bilingual education to the side and say, we're just using English in this class, we're just using English in this school district. But the court did protect the right of parents to organize these after school language classes. So it it hurt because it pushed bilingual education to the side in terms of the school district taking control, but it did help because it gave those rights to the parents, and because of that, bilingual education did kind of start just taking hold in that during this time. Next, we have Brown v. Board of Education. This was a Supreme Court case decided in 1954. Just like every other Brown case, this case dealt with segregation of schools. Brown was a big civil rights and just equal opportunity person. He fought for all of that kind of equal treatment of everybody. And this case is the exact same. The whole separate but equal comes from this. In this case, the Supreme Court decided that ELLs could not be fully separated from other students. So this was big because it did provide federal backing that forced schools to allow bilingual students to learn with their English-speaking peers. Next, we have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This was passed in 1965. This act created funding, policies for schools to follow, and procedures that were aimed to target low-income students. This act was huge because it did provide that funding and it did provide more federal backing for these bilingual students. And as far as I know, this was the first just big piece of legislation that directly targeted low-income families. So it was a big step. Next, we have Title VII, which is the Bilingual Education Act. Uh, this was this act was passed in 1968. It was reauthorized 6 times before being um, just, I don't want to say done away with, because it wasn't. It was just kind of improved and changed into something more. But it was proposed by a Texas senator, Ralph Yarborough. This original bill only applied to Spanish surname students, but several legislators came together and put their bills together, and they all worked well and worked hard and created this piece of legislation, and it provided grants. So great because it provided more funding. However, it did only apply to programs that were already funded. So, like I said, it was a huge step because it did provide more funding to these programs that still didn't have enough funding even after this act, but it did kind of hurt because it didn't allow for any new programs to get started because there was no funding provided to those programs through this act. Next, we have Lau v. Nichols. This was a Supreme Court case decided in 1974. This was by far the most influential court case for ELL education. This is where the sink or swim case comes in. Um, the the school district argued that the Chinese American students were not just let to sink or swim, but they were given equal treatment to that of other students. But however, in Justice William Douglas's opinion, he stated that there is no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum for students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. We also get the Lau remedies from this case. These Lau remedies targeted districts that were ignoring the needs of ELO students. So these Lau remedies in this case kind of forced these school districts into implementing these bilingual education programs for ELL students that needed them. Next, we have the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. This act was passed in 1974. This act included the Lau remedies, and ultimately, this act was just a codified essence of the Lau v. Nichols case. A kind of key concept from this act is this quote that says, "No state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on account of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin by the failure of an educational agency to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students in its instructional programs." So again, it just embodied what Lau v. Nichols and the Supreme Court was trying to establish in that case. It created the uh, bilingual education programs that these ELL students needed, and it forced the school districts to implement these programs. Next, we have the No Child Left Behind Act. This was, of course, passed in 2001, and it just reauthorized the ESEA basically. Part of the NCLB replaced parts of the ESEA, but ultimately it was just it was the same thing, just an improved version. For example, the NCLB removed the word bilingual and replaced it with the limited English proficient label. So it really just reestablished what the ESEA was trying to accomplish, and it just established it in a way that would benefit the ELL students more during this time. Um, and it also replaced, like I said, bilingual with the LEP label to include more students in this realm, and it also, in my opinion, was a little less objective that way. Next, we have Title III. This is part of the NCLB. This is one thing that the NCLB changed about the ESEA. Title III replaced Title VII, and Title III provided formal grants to state education agencies. So, of course, that in turn provided grants to school districts and local education agencies. It distinguished between bilingual and non-bilingual programs, so it requires that ELLs be placed in language instruction education programs. Unlike Title VII, Title III, however, doesn't recognize any of the facts, resources, or things that negatively affect ELL students. So it was great. It provided more funding, and it required that ELLs be placed in a education program that would help them. But it did it did neglect the negative effect ELLs negative effect and resources and all that was pretty crucial for ELL students. Next, we have Title I. This is again part of the NCLB. Title I requires testing of all students in elementary and high school, starting at grade 3. This did tend to discourage the use of bilingual education programs, however. More focus was placed on testing, and so bilingual education programs again kind of got pushed to the back burner because everybody was worried about getting those high test scores. Title I did allow for testing in the student's home language, but however, most students tested in English because most schools, I would assume, did not have the necessary requirements for them to test in that home language. So this did put pressure on schools because they were worried about that. If they had a high LEP population, the school would receive bad scores on these tests because the students couldn't take them, and then the schools would be labeled as failing. And then we have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act flexibility. This became available in 2011 under the Obama administration, and basically this granted states flexibility from Title I accountability. States had to present an alternative plan for school reform, including college and career-ready expectations for all students, state development differentiated recognition, and supporting effective instruction and leadership. But by 2014, 43 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico had been approved for ESEA flexibility. Thank you.